Hi, it's Sparkles Watson here. One of my go-to products from Fora and Equine is the pre-fuel gel and the refuel gel. I would use these all the time at one-day events and at international events. The pre-fuel is an instant energy boost and it's great for supporting the muscle function. So this is all great to use it before they compete. So I usually would give this about an hour before they start competing. And then the refuel, which is great, helps them recover afterwards and it replaces the electrolytes that they've lost. So basically those two work in conjunction together really well.
It's busy old time, busy time of year, which is nice. It's good to be busy. Don't want to be too busy though. But I thought that sort of getting to the time of year where people might be heading off to maybe 80 champs at Bramham, maybe, had a good spring aiming for the first 1-star, or really just anyone who wants to get some top tips from an absolute legend of the sport. This is a re-release of our little mini-series that I did with Louise Jones from Red Mills and Tina Cook. And what we did is we did a little mini-series where we did the build-up to going to a 3-day event. So in the run-up to it, and then when we're there, and this episode really talks about that preparation for the dressage, as we all know, and as Sam bangs that drum, it is the most influential part of eventing. And let's see if we can get some tips here, some really good points in how best to prepare our horse nutritionally, but also from when we are away at a 3-day. And I think it'll be really useful. Go back and find the rest of that series. It'll be a really good thing to go and have a look at, and I hope you enjoy it. And I will be back soon on a podcast. Not sure what subject. Maybe an alpha. That'd be fun. Yeah, we'll speak to Dee. See if we can get an alpha going. And be back soon. Thanks very much, guys. Hope you enjoy it. Hello, listeners. Welcome to the second episode in our little mini-series here on the whole box. Once again, I've got the wonderful Louise Jones from Red Mills. Louise, are you ready to go with episode number 2?
I am indeed, Spike. Pleasure to be back with you.
Amazing. And we are honoured and privileged to have Tina Cook in our presence once again. Tina, are you well?
I'm very well, thank you, Spike.
Excellent. Well, look, in our first episode, we talked about the planning and preparation in the build up to a 3-day and traveling there and being in a position that we've got our horse in a tip-top condition for the start of that week. We've been spending weeks and months with training and all the money and all that sort of stuff. And now we need to be in a position that we're ensuring that we can go out there and perform, and hopefully perform to the best that we possibly can. So, Tina, in that immediate, those immediate day after you've arrived at a 3-day, what are the key things that you're wanting to achieve from not just from the feed intake, but what are you doing practically to ensure that your horse is on top form?
I think, I've been very lucky to be able to travel horses around the world to competitions. Obviously, it depends on how far they had to travel. But I'm very aware, like in the first days, and Liz Brown, our team vet for many years, has always been very strict that the first days that the horses actually get a chance to settle, rather than just taking a horse off the lorry, the riders getting overexcited, let's go and work them, and do too much with them too soon when they haven't given their bodies enough chance to rehydrate, settle in to the climate change, if there is a climate change, and their general surrounding. And giving their muscles chance to recover. Obviously, it depends on how far you've travelled, whether it's an hour or 20 hours. But just, make that part of your plan when you want to arrive, how your horse is likely to recover. When I get them off the lorry, I do like the horses to go and have a good graze. So again, that they get some grass into their system, make sure that they have a drink. Sometimes eating a bit of grass might encourage a horse to then come back to the lorry, have a drink, then can go and have another walk around before you put them into the stables, on-site stabling. That's where you are, which is, again, quite an excitable environment for a lot of horses when they first arrive. So you want to try and get the horses in many ways as switched off as possible. I know I'm talking about my sharper horses, but just giving the horses a chance to settle in. They know they're at a competition. You know, if they're at a 3-day or an excitable situation, you want them to settle in because, you know, as you said, all the training and expense of getting there, you don't want to overdo it just because you as the rider is the one that's overexcited and wants to do too much. You need to be strict with yourself and make a plan of what work you're going to do with the horses. Well, an A, B and C plan on A, if this is what the horse's normal temperament's like and they're fine, this is what I want to do, I'm going to be strict with myself. And a B plan that if your horse has suddenly become some mad crazy thing, which is out of character, that you don't then suddenly give it 5 hours work on the first day you get there and then wonder why the next day it's tied up. You know, and look, we've all made those sort of mistakes in years gone by, and bearing in mind I've done it for a long time, I'm sure I have made those mistakes, but whenever we make mistakes we try and learn from it. And I have found that actually giving the horses a bit more time to settle in and get their feeding regime and the horses settled actually works more beneficial for you when the competition actually starts.
And Louise, in that sort of first 24 hours after we've arrived at a competition, are you advising, you know, continuation of the same feed that they've had before, or do you like a mash, or are you making any adjustments to what they're normally having? What's your take on that first day?
I think you want to try and keep things as consistent as you can, because, you know, with all, as Tina said, with all the everything going on in the stables and the new environment, you know, they are stressed anyway. So you don't want to be adding to that by doing a complete change of diet. So where you can, try and stick to your normal feed. I do like a little bit of mash. I would have introduced that to the horse well in advance of them getting to the venue, so they're used to a small amount of maybe mash in their diet, and that can just help them settle really a bit and get them eating properly. It's the old rule of don't make sudden changes, so try and keep things as consistent as you can. The only thing I may change a little bit is if they've been on obviously a long journey to the event, I would be looking at supplementing electrolytes to replace any losses that have happened during traveling. And also, although some people, the jury's out a little bit on whether they're brilliantly effective, but I have had really good results with NutriCam syringes, which are a calming syringe that you can just give the horses just to help them settle. So yeah, that might be something if you have a horse that is really not settling down very well, or doesn't settle very well, it's worth a try to see if it makes a bit of a difference. And then just plenty of forage, let them sort of settle in and engage in their natural feeding behavior. And if they have traveled a long distance, again, just maybe try and feed from the floor. I know we touched on shipping fever in the last episode, Spike, but anything that you can do to have that head down position so that the airways are clearing after traveling. So yeah, it's just about trying to remain consistent, no sudden changes, and as Tina said, helping them to settle into the new environment is critical.
What I would definitely add in there, and it's now compulsory at all FEI events, is that monitoring of the temperature. The FEI changed their veterinary regulations this winter, and now all horses arriving at an FEI event have to, the person responsible, which is the rider, has to, through the horse app, input twice daily temperature taking in the 3 days before traveling, and then twice daily at competitions. This was done in response to the EHV outbreak in Spain last year. I think, outside of that, from a disease surveillance point of view, I think it's such a key thing to do once horses have travelled any distance, really, twice a day. To know what that temperature is, if it's creeping up from a veterinary aspect. If I can start a horse on antibiotics when the temperature is creeping up, rather than waiting for it to have a temperature that's 40.2 and it's got an increased respiratory rate and there's already pus creeping up over its lungs, that's a really serious condition. And and the difference between a temperature that's crept a wee bit above normal to that may only be 12-24 hours tops. so it can move very quickly. So that monitoring is very important afterwards. So outside of it being compulsory at FEI competitions, there's some very, very good practical sense to doing that as well. So take my veterinary hat off again. So Tina, we're at our 3-day. What do you and what do your grooms do to monitor the horses? Let's say appetite and hydration in those first few days afterwards. Are you that can be tricky. You can go to events where there might be automatic watering. Let's say at badminton, for example, or what are you doing to ensure that you're staying on top of what's going on? And this might seem a bit obvious, but I think it's really important that people are aware of what is we might take for granted of what's being done every day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the water intake is obvious. So the girls that work for me would make sure that the horses had a drink and not just put them in the stable and not check that every time they walk in. Always just glance around the stable and check what is normal, going back to the normality. Also, just thinking about it when they arrive and you give them their first feed at whatever point that is appropriate. But at least for me, I would give a horse a big feed as soon as it arrives. I would, as I said, like to get grass through the system as much as you can, but all in relative normalness, not have so much grass that they're not used to grass, everything in moderation. That's what I'm trying to say. And, if a horse does have a reasonably large feed, I would give it half the normal quantity of feed, and then maybe in 3 hours later give it the other half. Don't overface a horse with a massive great bucket full of food when, if you've been traveling, obviously they're not used to that and they haven't had the exercise with appropriate to the amount of food that you're going to give it. So I would be very much somebody a little and often, as I would be in a lot of the horses' work as well. So try not to do things that are completely out of character when you get to a competition that you wouldn't normally do at home. Just things when you get to a 3-day, it's so easy to get influenced by what other people do around you. And you might be thinking, God, well, I don't normally do that. Geez, I better go and do that this week because, so-and-so 2 stables down is doing that. And try not to get influenced by that. Stick with what you know. And if you really do want to inquire, I'm quite a sort of nosy person. I like to ask questions. And when they give me the answer, I either think, well, that's a load of rubbish, or actually that's quite useful. Go and ask why that person is feeding whatever they're feeding, and most people are pretty helpful, but that doesn't mean, take it on board and think about it for another time, but don't drastically change anything that you're particularly doing with your horse. Somebody might want to ride their horses 4 times before they do a dressage test, but your horse is normally quite lazy and you normally ride it once. So then don't suddenly copy what they do with theirs. So, that is something I try and talk to the youngsters or talk to anyone about, and actually have the confidence to stick to your routine and how your horse is feeling on that day as to what you do with it, and just be very aware with that, and to be flexible. And that flexible is with the exercise and the feed, and everything all goes together, really.
That's great advice. There's such a huge element of contagiousness, contagious worrying when you're at a 3-day and there's a lot of looking sideways. I think a pair of blinkers for the rider is not a bad idea sometimes. Louise, what are your views on putting, we're talking there a little bit about hydration and, ensuring our horses are drinking. And what about, a bit of an old fashioned thing, but what about salt in their feed? Would you, do you have an opinion on whether that's right for an individual horse, or is it something that, let's say you think they're not drinking enough when you're away, adding a little bit of salt to encourage them to drink? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think obviously your hard feed will contain some sodium and chloride or, salt in there anyway. But dehydration can be a big issue, particularly if they've travelled long distances. So I am a fan of putting a little bit of salt in on top of their feed. I think you're probably not going to overdo it, and it's probably better to have slightly too much electrolytes than not enough. So a little bit of normal table salt in on top of their feed is absolutely fine. Most horses at home would have a salt lick or would have salt added to the feed anyway. But what does kind of become maybe a little bit more important after, say, they have travelled is actually some of the other electrolytes as well, like potassium, because they may not have been eating full amounts of forage when they're traveling. They may not settle in the stable and eat lots of forage, which is obviously a very rich source of potassium. So in some cases, I would be saying, feed a specifically formulated electrolyte supplement like EquiLite G, made by Forans, just to make sure that you've covered all the electrolytes and that hopefully their hydrogen status is going to be better. But equally, you don't want to go overboard. So, there's no point in feeding double, triple the amount of electrolytes that it says on the tub, because actually you could make the situation a lot worse in that if they don't drink, they're just going to become more dehydrated. So, a little bit of salt in the diet's fine. And if they've had a very long, hard journey and you think actually there is significant kind of dehydration, but they are drinking water, then look at maybe the oral electrolyte products. So they come in powders or liquids, whichever you find best. And I think that there's one in a syringe as well. So called Refuel, which you can use as well if you don't want to risk putting them off their feed or their water.
Lovely, Louise, that's great. And listeners, I'm going to just chuck in a couple of things in there that I think are really important for monitoring whenever you're away and we're talking about hydration. Monitor the horse's urine. If you can watch a horse have a pee and see what colour that is. We're talking about our horses as athletes, and same as our human athletes. That the urine does not want to be too yellow. It should be a pale straw coloured. A little bit of cloudiness at the end of the stream is normal. They have a lot of calcium in their urine, horses. But if you're there and it's very dark or it looks a bit thicker, then that would definitely be an indicator that they're dehydrated. So I think that's something that can be used as a really good monitoring technique. And actually that comes again with what Tina's talking about, understanding what's normal for your horse. When do they have a wee? Is it straight after they've had they've exercised, or you've put a bit more shavings in their bed? And that can be a really good tool to keep an eye on what's going on with their hydration. And actually, you can, at any of these 3-day events, there's treating vets around, and they'll be able to help and support you and do something about that hydration. That is allowed at 3-day events, if they need topping up in one way or another, if they are behind. And their droppings as well. Are they normal? Are they getting dry? Are they reduced amounts as well? Anything that might be indicative of a little bit of an impaction or just a reduction in motility through their intestinal tract. I think those are two really key things to be keeping an eye on. And listeners, I'm sure you'll be mucking out your own horses, and the pros have got their wonderful grooms doing that as well. But again, things that just we maybe take for granted, that there are 5 droppings overnight in a stable, and this morning there's 2. That's not normal. So those are other areas to keep an eye on, and vets will always be much happier preemptively treating horses, whether that be with a little bit of intravenous fluids to stay ahead of it, rather than having to react to a horse that's become significantly dehydrated or showing signs of colic, or tied up, or the other different things that can happen there. So that's my 2 cents on things to keep a close eye on. I think there's some great information there, and hopefully we've now got a horse ready to rock for its dressage, maybe done a PB, and in our next episode we're going to talk about what we're doing on cross country day, pre-cross country and also post cross country, and making sure that's a very successful day as well. So Tina, Louise, thank you again for your time, and listeners, I look forward to you all joining us for the 3rd installment in our series.